Alright, so now we are picking up into kind of the second video that we have here. This is about Gestalt perception. This video is going to cover this and also middle vision. Alright, so what the hell is Gestalt perception? I'm going to illustrate that by talking a little bit about this figure here. If you've taken a class with me before, you may have seen this figure here, and if you have, then you know exactly what this figure is. But the cool thing about this is that if you have not taken a class with me before, you may not know exactly what this image is. So think about it for a second. See if the image comes to you. It may not. All right, so I gave you enough time. What this image is essentially a blown out, distorted, bad photograph of a cow. And so you can kind of see here that, I've traced the outline here, but you have an ear, you have another ear, and you have kind of the snout. You got an eye right here, an eye right here, a nose, these nostrils, the top of its head. You can even kind of see the fence that it has its head over too. So this is a cow. Now, hopefully you are able to perceive it. Not everybody does, I find, whenever I show them this, but I'll let you look at that for a second. The cool thing about all of this, though, is that if I were to go back, now, I'm showing you the exact same picture that you saw before, and if I asked you, what is it, you know immediately that it is a cow. So, why is that interesting? Because essentially what our eyes are picking up is still detecting the same thing. It's not even detecting a cow, really, right? This isn't really a picture of a cow, it's just a picture of white and black spots, right? There's no real cow here. Technically there is, because it's a picture, there's a photograph that's been manipulated, but what our eyes are detecting is not a cow. It's detecting this big black spot, a lot of white space, right? But once we see the cow, once we perceive it to be there like that, then when we go back, we can't do anything but perceive there to be a cow there. It's hard to go back to look at this again with fresh eyes and to say, yeah, that doesn't look like anything to me. Now that you have that experience, it's hard to unsee it. One more example. So, if I were to show you this image, what is it that you see? I'll give you a couple of seconds, and yes, again, this is just white and black spots, right? But if I were to expand it and ask you now, what do you see? Some of you may begin to see an object forming here. Or what about now? Now by this time, usually about half the class is able to identify what's in the center of this picture. If you haven't yet, I'll give you a hint. This outline shows it. It is a dog. It is a dog sniffing the ground. You can see its snout here, its flappy ear here, a leg, its tail, its back arching down. Looks like it's sniffing at the ground. It looks like there might be maybe a sidewalk right around here. It looks like there's probably a tree with a shade or shadow right around there. So here we have the dog. Now, if we were to go back to that first image and I were to ask you, what is it that you see? Almost everybody is now going to say they see a dog, right? And so again, what your eyes are picking up is not any different. Your eyes are still detecting the exact same features, but your mind is putting it together in the way that we've essentially learned. That we've learned that this is a dog, and now when we see this, we perceive it as a dog. So this is a good illustration of Gestalt psychology. If you've taken theories of counseling, if you've taken some personality classes, you may have heard of Gestalt psychology. Gestalt psychology is an old European form of psychology that's been around for a really long time. And it was really around the 60s and 70s that it made its way to America and started influencing at least how we think about things like therapy or things like perception. So the principle behind Gestalt psychology is I think pretty simple, that the idea that underlies it all is that our experiences and who we are as individuals is more than the sum of its parts. So what does that mean? Basically it means that the example that I like to give is that if I were to give you a personality inventory, the most common one is the Big Five. You have where you calculate an inventory that tells you, it gives you scores for openness to new experiences, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So if I were to get those 5 numbers, would I be able to take those 5 numbers and clone your personality? I wouldn't, right? And that's because your personality is much more complicated than that. Who you are as an individual is much more complicated than that. And perception is very, very similar. that our perception is more than just these individual components. So to think about that, to think about that in terms of perception, think about it like this, that here, just moving backwards, here what your eye is what your eye is detecting, what it is sensing, is just white and black spots. But what you are perceiving, your perception now, is not just white and black spots. It is essentially a dog, right? So that is an example of Gestalt psychology, that we are perceiving something that we don't actually have all the information of. We don't see an actual photograph of a dog here, but our mind puts it together. That is an example of our perception being more than the sum of its parts. To illustrate this further, there are the book, and so I'm going to speed through some of these because the book goes into more detail about them. But to illustrate this, we're going to talk a little bit about the Gestalt grouping rules. The Gestalt grouping rules is essentially that there are certain kinds of patterns in perceptual rules that we follow. And we do this automatically. We're kind of born with it. That this is something that that is intuitive to us. It comes to us automatically. So whenever I show this image in class, and this isn't the best example because this box that I'm in right here, get me out. This box that I'm in up here kind of obscures this, so you can definitely see it in your PowerPoint though. But you can probably get the idea. What is it that is this shape? Most people are going to say an arrow or a house, right? You can kind of see up here that it's, got what looks like a roof, the triangle part, and it's got the square part that looks like the house part, right? So that is an example of an illusory contour. Why? Because if I were to ask you, do you actually see a line right here? You would say, no, you see this line right here, but you don't see a line up and down. You don't see a vertical line there. But our brain essentially is going to perceive there to be a line there. What we perceive is that this shape, this house shape, has been either cut out or a white shape has been superimposed on top of it. So we perceive there to be contours here even though there aren't actually any lines, but instead the absence of a line that we are going to perceive as a line. So the reason why it's called an illusory contour is because it's essentially a ghost line. That is a phantom contour. That is a phantom edge. It doesn't actually exist, but our mind perceives it that way. Really, what we should be perceiving with this is a congregation of Pac-Men that are talking with one another, right? But instead, we perceive it more as like this white arrow that is on top of these black circles. All right, another example of this here, like this panda, for example. This panda doesn't have a head. It has floating ears, floating facial features, but it doesn't have a head. But we perceive there to be a head because this looks like there's a white circle because of these illusory contours. That's the Gestalt grouping principle. Why? Because what we are perceiving is more than what's actually there on the page. Here's another example. This is some Life magazine art renditions. So you can see that each of these women seem to be disembodied and floating in space, right? This individual right here on the right looks like her head and her arm are floating in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, but that's not actually how we perceive it, right? We don't actually perceive it that way. Instead, we perceive there to be these outlines. Our brain is going to fill in these contours even though they're not actually there. All right, so the next grouping rule is good continuation. Good continuation is the idea that our brain is going to take things like lines and edges and contours and assume that if they look like they follow, they continue, that we assume that they are part of the same line. A way to illustrate that is at this figure down here. If I were to ask you how many lines are in figure A, you might say 4, but most of us are going to say 2. Why? Because it looks like we have 2 lines, one going this way and one going this way. So we perceive it like B, but not like C. Why? Because it looks like this line is going to follow through and continue on past this junction. That's good continuation. This is something, again, that's automatic to us. This really cool illusion that you see right here on the right, that's another example of it, where you're seeing there's no special effects here. It's just this young woman with a mirror. So what is it that is the illusion? It looks like she's empty. It looks like she's hollow inside, right? Because it looks like this yard continues this line across all the way through like that. So it looks like what we're seeing right here in the middle is just what's behind her, right? But we know that's not possible. What we're looking at is this mirror is reflecting. This mirror is going to be reflecting parts of the yard in front of her, but it's angled in such a way that essentially we have this line continue in this yard, continuing with the thing in front of her that gives the illusion that it is connected, that it continues across. So that's good continuation. Alright, this one, very simple. If I were to ask you to categorize what you see here, almost everybody is going to say basically two chunks, right? That we have this group over here and we have this group over here, right? But not many of us are going to say that we see 4 rows of 10 objects, right? That's similarity. We tend to group things together when they look alike. If I were to ask you here to describe what it is you see, almost everybody is going to say 4 groups of 3. And then I said, okay, is it 4 groups of 3 like the top shapes, the middle shapes, and then the bottom shapes? No. You perceive it as this group right here, this group right here, this group right here, and this group right here because they're close to one another. We tend to group them whenever they're like that. If I were to ask you which of these lines seem to stand out to you as pairs, almost everybody is going to say 2 and 3 and 7 and 8. Why? Because 2 and 3 are close to one another and they are parallel. They seem to stand out. On the opposite end, though, we have 7 and 8, which are symmetrical. And that gives the illusion, or not the illusion, but it captures our eye, and we tend to group these things. And so even though, for example, 2 and 5 are the same line, they are parallel, they don't stand out to us as easily. We don't group them as easily because they're far apart. There's things in between them disrupting that. But if they're together like this, they kind of stand out. And the last few that we have here, if I were to ask you to group line 1, you would say that this right here is a pair, 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 and this right here is a pair. But if I were to take and circle these right here like that, and then I asked you how are they grouped, you'd probably say that we have one group right here, one group right here, one group right here, and one group right here. Even though you'll see that these two circles, these two black circles, are closer to one another than these two black circles, right? And that's because they seem to share a common region. Now that they are bound like this, that they are circled, it seems like they belong together because they occupy the same space, or at least that's how we perceive it. And we can do the same thing if we connect them. Again, here, even though these two circles are closer to one another, we tend to assume that these right here are part of a group, that they belong together because they are connected. And then the final one is the figure ground illusions, or the figure ground principles. So right here on the right, you've seen this a million times in your elementary school art class, where you're seeing both a vase or a goblet or a chalice or a cup of some sort, or you see two faces that are really close to one another, that maybe they're about to kiss, right? So depending on what it is that you see depends on what you are perceiving as the background. If you perceive this white space as being the background, then you perceive this as being a goblet or a cup or a vase. If you perceive the brown or the orange or whatever this color is as being the background, then you perceive these white faces to be in front of it. So that is called the figure ground principle, where depending on kind of what we're attending to, that's going to change what we think the object is. To look at this other example right here on the left, we have this bottle of Coke, and this Coke is red, right? And if we perceive that, then we're perceiving the white on either side of it to be the background. But if we were to perceive the flip-flops, what we're going to say is that the white is the figure and the red is the background, right? So you can kind of see both of these. This next slide just tells you a little bit about why we might perceive things that way. I'm going to skip over that though, because I want to make a little bit of time for middle vision. Middle vision is aptly named because it is between the lower level perceptual processing that we've been talking about and the higher order object recognition. So this is kind of right there in the middle, along with the Gestalt grouping principles. So The Gestalt grouping principles are a form of middle vision. The next pieces that we're going to be talking about are going to be other forms of it. The first I want to talk about is the global superiority effect. This is also kind of a grouping principle as well, where whenever we are looking at an object, what we do is we perceive the large features of it first, and then we look at the small details. So we're really good at detecting the whole of what something is, and then afterwards, then we detect the smaller pieces of it. So the way that people talk about this is that we have global cues, which are going to be the global features, the big overall features of that shape, of that object. And then, after that, then we process the local features, the local cues, the things that provide detail to that specific object. And these pictures right here give you examples of that. If I were to ask you what each of these things are, almost everybody's going to say that this is an H, a C, and an L. This is an H made out of S's, an C made out of N's, and an L made out of H's. Because the first thing we are going to detect is the global features, and then we'll detect the local, smaller features after that. The dynamic superiority effect is very similar to this. The idea here is that if something is moving, if something is rotating, we tend to be able to recognize it better, more quickly than something that is stationary. And part of this is because it grabs our attention, and so we're able to kind of spend more perceptual resources on it than something that is not moving. So the dynamic superiority effect is simply that whenever something is moving, it's easier to discriminate them versus something that is not moving. And then finally, in middle vision, we have non-accidental features. And non-accidental features are these different kinds of features that all objects have that tell us about their depth, that tell us about which parts of that object are closer to us than other parts. So before I even show you what any of these things are, I want to just spend some time talking about this picture. So if I were to ask you, hopefully you can see where my mouse is, if I were to ask you which side is closer to you, this side right here or this side right here, almost everybody's going to say this side right here, right? But why? How do you know? It's a flat screen, right? If you're looking at this on your phone isn't popping out at you. You know it's flat. So why does it appear to be closer to you, or the part that's closest to you? The reason why is because of the different features that this object has. These different angle lines are going to tell us quite a bit about what it is that we are seeing. So this right here is a T-junction. A T-junction is essentially where you have one line that appears to be interrupted by another line. So we have this line right here is then interrupted by this line, and that tells us that there's something in front of this line right here. It has been interrupted because there's something in front of it. And so if there's something in front of it, then you know that it's closer to you than that other line. So that is a T-junction. We see this all the time in every piece of furniture you have, and probably your desk right now if you're looking at this on your desk or a kitchen table or whatever. The Y-junctions, you can see right here, the Y-junctions usually are going to indicate whenever there is a corner that is facing towards you, and the arrow junctions are going to indicate when there is a corner facing away from you. And so we can even see this in other parts of the image as well. So if we were to look, like, let's say down here, we see that this does not look like a Y junction. It is an arrow junction. It looks like it is farther, or not farther away, but that is not pointing towards us. But if we look at this right here, this is a Y junction. And so this Y junction is going to tell us that this corner is pointing towards us. Right below it is pointing away from us, is pointing down. Alright, so these are non-accidental features. You see them all the time in the real world. They're very rarely violated because unless it's like an art installation where somebody has deliberately made a paradoxical image. Yeah, that's pretty much where I want to leave it for now. This video has gone on a little bit long, so I'm going to stop it. And then next video, we're going to talk a little bit about how we're taking everything we've talked about so far and combining it into recognizing that this is a cup of coffee, that this is a set of headphones, and so on. Alright, so exciting stuff. I will see you in the next video.